She was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning with a suitcase, a cat carrier, and a look on her face like she'd already decided something I hadn't agreed to yet. "I need you to drive me to Nashville," she said. I hadn't even had coffee. "My name's Walt Kessler. 49 years old, run a small engine repair shop in a town in eastern Tennessee you've probably never heard of." Up until that morning, the most complicated thing in my life was a riding mower with a busted carburetor. Then my neighbor Ray Ann Sutter showed up on my porch with everything she owned and asked me to drive her 400 miles away from her own wedding. I didn't know yet that the drive was going to change more than her life. It was going to change mine too. Took the whole day to get there, and by the time it was over, neither one of us was the same person who'd climbed into that truck. Get comfortable. This one takes its time. I should back up further than the driveway, because to understand why I opened that truck door without a single question, you need to understand 3 years of fence line, noticing I never once let myself act on. Ray Ann Sutter moved into the house 2 doors down the summer I turned 46. Quiet woman, dark hair she kept pinned up with a pencil more often than not, a laugh that came out of her before she meant to let it, and then looked almost embarrassed about it after. She ran a little bakery out of a converted garage. Cinnamon rolls on Tuesdays, sourdough the rest of the week. A smell that drifted clean across 3 yards every single morning, whether anybody asked for it or not. I noticed her the way you notice weather. Constant, unavoidable, not something you think you have any say over. The flour dust that never quite left her forearms. The way she'd stand at her mailbox some mornings just breathing the air a minute before going back inside, like she was stealing herself a few seconds of something. The particular warmth in her voice when she called my name across the fence. "Walt, you got a minute. This latch is fighting me again." And the little thrill I was ashamed of feeling every single time she said it. She was engaged the whole time I knew her. Grant Osmond ran a car dealership 2 counties over, the kind of man who shook your hand a little too hard and told you what truck you ought to be driving whether you asked his opinion or not. I'd shaken that hand exactly twice and washed mine both times after, which tells you about all you need to know regarding my opinion of him. I never said a word about any of it. Not to her, not to anybody. A man my age, alone 6 years since my wife Carol passed, doesn't go around admitting he's gone soft over an engaged woman's laugh across a fence. I told myself it was nothing. I got good over 3 years at telling myself that. Turns out I was wrong the whole time. But I didn't know that yet. Not on the morning this story really starts. 6 a.m., middle of October, sky still more black than gray. I heard gravel crunch outside and figured it was somebody's early paper route until I looked out the window and saw Ray Ann standing in my driveway in a robe with a coat thrown over it, suitcase in one hand, cat carrier in the other, mascara starting to run though she hadn't cried yet. I was out the door in my undershirt before I'd even thought about it. "Ray Ann, it's your wedding day. I know what day it is, Walt. You're supposed to be getting your hair done right now. I know that too." Her voice cracked right at the end, just slightly, and she set the cat carrier down like her arms had finally given out on her. Inside, her cat Biscuit let out a long, unimpressed meow, entirely unbothered by the collapse of anyone's wedding plans. "I need to get out of town before 9 o'clock. My truck's got a dead battery, and you're the only person I know who wouldn't call my mother first and ask questions second." I looked at her a long moment. Really looked, in a way 3 years of careful fence line manners had never quite let me. Whatever this was costing her, it was costing plenty. "Get in," I said. I didn't ask why. Not then. Some part of me, the same part that spends every working day listening to what an engine's not telling you, reading trouble in a sound before a customer's even explained the problem, could tell that asking questions in that driveway wasn't going to get me the truth. Not yet. Just a version of it, dressed up nice enough to hand a neighbor at 6 in the morning, so I grabbed a shirt, loaded her suitcase, set the cat carrier on the back seat, and pulled out of that driveway before the sun had cleared the tree line, both of us in yesterday's clothes, both of us fully aware, without saying so out loud, that whatever this day turned into, it was already the strangest and somehow most alive either of us had felt in longer than either of us wanted to admit. We didn't talk for the first 20 miles. I let the radio hum low, some early morning gospel station out of Knoxville, and let her stare out the window at a town waking up behind us that didn't know yet anything unusual had happened. Somewhere past the county line, she finally spoke. "You're not going to ask? Figured you'd tell me when you were ready," she laughed, short and disbelieving. "That's very patient of you. I fix small engines for a living." Patience is the whole job. That got a real laugh out of her. Small, surprised, like she hadn't expected to have one left in her that morning. She pulled her knees up onto the seat, turned sideways to face me, the robe slipping just slightly off one shoulder as she got comfortable, and I kept my eyes very deliberately on the road, jaw tight, doing my level best not to notice the particular gold the morning light was doing to her hair. "Grant's not a bad man," she said finally, arguing with someone who wasn't me. "That's the thing people don't understand. He's not cruel, not really. He's just very good at making you feel small in ways you can't ever quite point to. You try to explain it and it comes out sounding like nothing. He picks the restaurant every time. He calls my bakery cute, like a hobby. He already bought the house we're moving into and didn't ask my opinion on the paint. None of that sounds like a reason to run out on your own wedding. But it adds up. It adds up to a life where you disappear a little more every single year until one morning you look up and can't remember the last time anybody asked what you wanted." I kept my hands steady on the wheel, though something in my chest had gone tight and angry on her behalf. "Sounds like plenty of reason to me." She glanced over, and the look lingered a beat too long to just be gratitude. "Most people would tell me I'm getting cold feet. I fix broken things for a living. Rayanne, I know the difference between something that just needs an adjustment and something that's rusted clean through. Sounds to me like you've been rusting a long while." She didn't answer that right away. But her hand, resting on the bench seat between us, drifted a couple inches closer to mine, and neither of us moved it back. Her phone had been buzzing since we crossed into the next county. She'd been ignoring it, but around hour 2, she finally looked. 31 missed calls. A string of texts from Grant that started polite, "Where are you?" everyone's asking, and ended somewhere else entirely. "You're embarrassing me in front of 200 people. Get back here now." And then, worse, "If you do this, I will make sure everyone in that town knows exactly what you are." She read that last one twice, then turned the phone face down against her knee. "What does he mean by that?" I asked, careful. She was quiet a moment. 3 years ago, I had a rough patch. My dad died, the bakery almost went under, I wasn't sleeping right. I saw a counselor for a while. Grant's the only one who knew besides my mother. Her jaw tightened. He's the kind of man who files things away. Every hard thing you ever told him in confidence becomes ammunition eventually. That's the part nobody sees from the outside. Something cold moved through my chest, the kind of anger I don't usually let myself feel about a stranger. "That's not something to be ashamed of," I said. "Losing your father, struggling, that's just being a person. Try telling that to 200 wedding guests he's about to feed a story to." Let him talk. People who know you'll know better, and people who don't, their opinion was never worth much to begin with. She looked at me a long moment, like she was recalculating something she'd already decided about me a long time ago. "You're a strange kind of kind, Walt Kessler. I get that a lot." Her hand, still resting near mine, finally closed the last couple inches and settled fully over my knuckles. She didn't say anything about it. I didn't either. We just drove that way a while, her thumb tracing slow, absent circles over the back of my hand, and something warm and unhurried settled low in my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the heater. We stopped around 10 at a diner off the interstate, one of those places with a pie case by the register and a waitress who called everybody on whether she'd met them or not. Rayanne hadn't eaten. Neither had I. I'd left the house so fast I'd forgotten my own thermos sitting on the counter. Over eggs and bad coffee, she told me the rest of it. How the engagement had started fine, even good, and how slowly, almost politely, Grant had trimmed pieces off her. Friends she didn't need, trips she didn't need, eventually the bakery itself. "Once we're married, you won't need to work so hard, Rayanne," said with a smile, like it was a gift and not a door closing. "I kept telling myself I was choosing security," she said. "That's what my mother calls it," said. Somewhere in the last few months, I started waking up at 4 in the morning with my chest tight, and it took me embarrassingly long to understand that wasn't nerves about the wedding. That was my whole body telling me the truth before my mouth would. That sounds like the smartest part of you talking, I said. Ought to listen to it more. She smiled at that. The first easy, unguarded smile I'd seen out of her all day, and reached across the table, resting her hand over mine where it sat next to my coffee cup. She didn't explain it. I didn't ask her to. We just sat there a moment, her thumb tracing slow circles over my knuckles while diner noise carried on around us, plates clattering, the waitress laughing at her own joke by the register, none of it touching the small, warm world that had somehow formed itself at our booth. "You want pie?" I asked, a little rougher than I meant to. God, yes. We split a slice of peach pie neither of us needed, her knee bumping mine under the table more than once, neither of us in any hurry to pull it away, and it was the nicest 20 minutes either of us had in longer than either of us admitted out loud. We hit weather outside Knoxville, the kind of sudden Tennessee thunderstorm that turns the interstate into a river in about 4 minutes flat. I pulled off at the next exit and found a gas station with an overhang, killed the engine, and let the rain hammer the roof like it had somewhere urgent to be. Ray Ann's phone buzzed again. She looked at it, sighed, and this time she answered. "Grant," she said, voice flat and steady, in a way I hadn't heard from her yet that day. I couldn't hear his side, but I watched it land on her face. First anger, tight around the eyes, then something that looked almost like relief, like a held breath finally let go. "No," she said. "I'm not confused. I'm not scared. I'm not having a breakdown. Grant, I'm having a realization, and the fact that you can't tell the difference is honestly the whole reason I'm in this truck right now." A pause. "You don't get to decide what my mental health history means to 200 people. That's mine. Goodbye, Grant." She hung up, set the phone in the cup holder. Her hands were shaking, but her voice, when she spoke again, wasn't. "I've never said anything like that to him in my life," she said, almost wondering at herself. "How's it feel?" She thought about it, like I finally exhaled. Then she turned to look at me properly, rain streaking gold and gray across the windshield behind her, close enough in the cab now that I could feel the warmth coming off her skin. Like something else too. I don't really know what to call it. "Try," I said, quiet. She studied me a long moment, my hands loose on the wheel, the truck ticking as it cooled, the storm doing its slow work outside, and then she leaned in and kissed me. Soft at first, testing, her palm coming up to rest against my jaw like she needed something solid to hold on to while she found out whether this was real. I met her the rest of the way, one hand sliding into the damp hair at the back of her neck, and for a long, unhurried minute, the whole world narrowed down to rain on metal and the warmth of her mouth against mine. When we finally broke apart, she laughed low, a little breathless. I did not expect my wedding day to end with that. Neither did I admitted. Not complaining, though. Me either. She settled back against her own seat, cheeks flushed, but her hand stayed twined with mine over the console for a long while after, thumb tracing slow circles that made it hard to keep my eyes fully on the road once the rain let up enough to drive again. We didn't head straight back to the interstate. Ray Ann asked, almost shy about it, if we could stop somewhere quiet a while. "Not to hide," she said, "just to breathe a minute before Nashville turns into the next complicated thing." And I knew exactly the spot. My late wife's brother had left behind a little piece of land outside a bend in the road, an old gravel clearing above a creek that nobody used anymore. I'd parked out there myself a handful of times over the years when the house got too quiet. We pulled in around 1 in the afternoon, tires crunching over wet gravel, mist still clinging low to the trees from the storm. I cut the engine, and for a minute neither of us moved, just sat there listening to the creek running fast over stones somewhere close. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "Prettier with the sun out, but I like it in the rain too. Quieter." She looked over at me, something unguarded and a little vulnerable in her face. "Thank you for today, Walt. All of it. I don't think I've said that properly yet. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know." Her eyes held mine. "That's not why I want to." I felt the air in the cab go warm and taut all at once. I didn't move first. Some part of me wanted her to have that, the choice entirely hers, after a morning spent taking back every choice somebody else had been making for her for years. She was the one who closed the distance, sliding across the bench seat, her hand finding the front of my shirt and gathering the fabric slow, deliberate. "Is this all right?" she asked, barely above a whisper, her mouth close enough to mine that I could feel the words more than hear them. "Ray Ann," I said, "it's about the only thing that's felt entirely right all day." She kissed me then, slower and surer than the one in the rain, her fingers settling at the curve of her waist, and the creek kept running outside the fogged-up windows, while the whole rest of the world went quiet and unimportant for a good long while. When she finally pulled back, both of us a little unsteady, she pressed her forehead to mine and laughed, soft and disbelieving. "I left my own wedding this morning," she said. "I noticed. I did not expect to end up parked in the woods with the man who fixes my bakery mixer, kissing him like a teenager. For the record," I said, "you can kiss me like that anytime you'd like, teenager or otherwise." She laughed again, brighter this time, and kissed me once more, easy and unhurried, before finally settling back against the seat with her hand still resting warm against my chest. We stayed out there the better part of an hour, talking low, her head eventually finding my shoulder, my arm finding its way around her, before either of us worked up the will to start the truck again and point it toward Nashville. The last 2 hours went easy and warm, both of us talking in that low, unhurried register people use once they've stopped performing for each other and started just being honest. Somewhere around Murfreesboro, her head came to rest against my shoulder at a red light and stayed there through most of the green ones after. "Why'd you say yes this morning?" she asked. "Really?" I thought about it honestly. "Because you showed up looking like someone who'd finally found the nerve to do the hardest thing they'd ever done, and some part of me's been half in love with you since that fence line 3 years back and never once let myself say so." She lifted her head, eyes wide, then soft. "3 years? Give or take." "Walt Kessler," she said, low and a little wondering. "You've been sitting on that a long time. Seemed like bad timing, most of it, you being engaged and all. And now? Now feels about right," I said, and she kissed my jaw, my cheek, finally my mouth again at the next red light, slow and certain, no storm required to explain it this time. Her cousin's place was a little brick house on a quiet street. She sat in the truck a moment before opening the door, like she wasn't ready for the drive to be over. "This is it," she said. "This is it. I don't know what happens now." "Nobody ever does," I said. "That's not a reason to be scared of it." She reached over, cupped my face in both hands, and kissed me slow and thorough, the cat carrier rattling softly in the backseat as if even Biscuit understood the moment deserved a little patience. "Will you call and check on me?" she asked against my mouth. "Not like a rescue mission, just to talk. And maybe more than talk, if you're willing to drive a truck this far again sometime. I'd drive it every weekend if you asked," I said, and meant every word of it. We sat in that truck another 20 minutes after that, neither of us in any hurry, trading slow kisses and quieter conversation until the porch light of her cousin's house flicked on and a curious face appeared in the window. At which point, Ray Ann laughed against my mouth and admitted she probably ought to go explain herself to somebody besides me for a while. I drove back to Tennessee alone that evening with the trailer of my old life feeling considerably lighter than it had that morning, if that makes any sense at all. I called her that first night, and the night after, and pretty soon, it wasn't really a question of whether I'd call. It was just something that happened, same as the sun coming up. Grant, for his part, didn't go quietly. There were a few weeks of messages, some to Ray Ann, couple that found their way to me too, all posturing about lawyers and reputations, and how everyone back home would eventually see her the way he did. None of it landed the way he wanted. Turns out a small town's memory is longer and fairer than a jilted man gives it credit for, and most folks who knew Ray Ann simply kept right on buying cinnamon rolls and asking after her, wedding or no wedding. I made the drive to Nashville most weekends that November, sometimes leaving Friday evening the second the shop closed and not getting back until Sunday night, half asleep at the wheel and grinning the whole way regardless. Some of those weekends were slow and easy. Dinner, a walk, her cousin's porch swing, hours of talking about nothing important that somehow felt like the most important conversations of my life. And some of those weekends, once we'd both stopped being quite so careful with each other, were considerably warmer than that, the kind of weekends where the drive home Sunday felt entirely too long and entirely too soon. both at once. By December, Ray Ann had put her old life fully behind her. The engagement legally and formally over. The house she and Grant had picked out sold off without her ever once having to set foot in it again. She started scouting locations for a new bakery, and I'll admit, I spent more weekends that winter helping her measure storefronts and argue with contractors than I did anything resembling pawn shop's paperwork, and I never once minded. There's a particular kind of warmth that builds slow between two people who've both already lived enough life to know better than to rush it, and to know better than to waste it once it's finally arrived. We weren't kids, we didn't pretend otherwise, but there was something almost giddy in the two of us anyway. Grown adults finding excuses to touch a shoulder passing in a kitchen, lingering a little too long over goodnight kisses at her cousin's front door, learning each other slow and thorough, and without a single ounce of the hurry either of us had expected to feel at our age. By the time the first snow came, the just checking in phone calls had turned into something we both simply called, without much ceremony, us, and neither one of us saw any reason to explain it further than that to anybody who asked. Ray Ann's new bakery opened the following spring. Same cinnamon smell, same easy laugh drifting out over the counter, just 40 minutes closer to my shop than her old garage had ever been, on account of where we'd decided, quietly and without much fanfare, to build the next stretch of both our lives together. Some mornings now, I still drive out early, same as that October morning that started all this. Except now there's coffee waiting when I get there instead of a suitcase on the porch. And instead of a 400-mile drive full of thunderstorms and quiet confessions, it's just the short, familiar road between two people who finally stopped being careful with each other. She still teases me every October about the day she left her own wedding in a robe with a cat carrier and no plan beyond a dead battery and a neighbor she barely knew. I still tell her the same thing every time. Best breakdown either one of us ever had. And every single time, she kisses me like she means it, because by now, we both know she does. So, what would you have done if your neighbor showed up on her wedding day asking for a ride 400 miles away? Would you have opened the truck door? And would you have let yourself fall for her along the way, slow, storm by storm, mile by mile? And has one unplanned decision ever turned into the best, warmest thing that ever happened to you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story kept you here the whole long drive, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.